So when we're thinking about our obstruction distances, we have to be mindful about the particular spray pattern that we have from that individual sprinkler head. And we certainly have to be thoughtful about what type of an interference or an obstruction we might be dealing with also. Given the fact that we're going to try to keep things consistent for your first go of this, we're using a similar reliable sprinkler head. This sprinkler is that RA3516, and when we think about the sequence of what we need to do, we're really looking to be able to determine the deflector distance down from the ceiling, which we're going to say this is approximately 1 inch right now. We also, when we think about our obstructions, this one's a little bit more challenging because it's a ceiling fan. With ceiling fans and the sprinkler head spray patterns, the first thing that water is going to hit into has normally been my rule for where we measure from. But the first thing that water is going to spray into, in this case, would be the ceiling fan blade. Now, NFPA has been very thoughtful about how ceiling fans and kind of like moving obstructions may come into play. But specifically for ceiling fans, if there were to be a sprinkler discharge, how much of an obstruction would this be if it was on? Well, I'd be more concerned about it moving airflow than I would be about it for interfering with water distribution, okay? Now that being said, there are special criteria for massive fans. High volume, low speed fans are covered differently up in chapter 20. But for this, we're doing residential sprinklers, talking about all things residential. We don't measure to the edge of the fan blade. The only time we would ever measure to the edge of the fan blade is if the fan blades themselves take up more than 50% of the area that they revolve within. So while it's spinning, if you can think about the actual, you can think about the area here, this blade, all 4 blades would have to take up much more area to exceed that 50%. So in the event that we're fortunate enough to deal with smaller fan blades, where again, now we go back to that thought of, well, what's the first thing water's really going to hit? It's going to be the outside motor housing. So for that, we just measure the distance down for the motor housing. And with all of these different parts of the light to be thoughtful of, again, I tend to be more conservative. And I try to think of this as drawing a straight box straight down and straight across. That's a very conservative approach, but there's no allowances within our obstruction tables for something that is of an unusual shape like what the ceiling fan is. So think of it as being straight down, straight across, and if I go from that, we've got a base dimension from the ceiling down to where the lights would be approximately 11 inches. 1 inch down deflector plate, and we go from edge of the obstruction to the center of the sprinkler head deflector, which would be 29 inches this time. So 1 inch down, we said 11 inches down, and 29 inches from edge to center of the deflector. We then now use that to determine what our A dimension would be. 1 inch down, 11, we'd have a 10-inch B dimension, and then we'd use that 10-inch B dimension in relation to how far away we would need to be for this to be compliant or not. That being said, I'm going to put up a couple barriers, and we're going to flow the sprinkler right now to see what this impact would be. So stay with me. All right, so we're set up with that same sprinkler head, same ceiling fan. Now we're going to get a little bit wet, and with camera angle number 1, camera angle number 2, and camera angle number 3, we're going to operate a sprinkler. I'm not going to get wet today, so we're using some stainless steel cable to operate the sprinkler, and we'll see whether this sprinkler head to the ceiling fan, what happens. Let's go. Part 2. Oh, they're stronger than you think, eh? All right, here we go. And it slipped again. This is like a bloopers reel. Okay, sprinkler head operating. 3, 2, 1. All right, so a whole lot of activity all at once. We're gonna have to see what the footage turns out, but what I think is important to recognize, I got moderately soaked, which is fine, but here's something that's kind of interesting in this particular case, is that whole obstruction, 50% of the fan, that whole scenario comes into play really well to say that I would have expected with that much water pressure and that much water coming out, it would have started to spin the ceiling fan. Interestingly enough, that big enough open space didn't. Now, because we're in a lab, and I kind of do like to try to demonstrate as much as we can, if you have a really good look, let me just grab one of these other cameras. If you have a really good look here at this shadow, it's literally just like you'd expect, because I've got that extra light. It's literally from the dirty sprinkler water. You can see almost perfectly the shadow of right there, that little silhouette. Everywhere I'm standing is in the light, but you can see that shadow of where the dirty sprinkler water didn't get on these white panels. So the obstruction, the distance, we'll look at that to see what the impact would have been. However, you can see that in that close proximity, the body of the fan certainly created a problem for us, and then its impact on the white wall. We have some water discharge that's higher, likely came scooting right across the top of the obstruction. Again, that's why the shape of these is really important to understand. The shape of your obstruction in that configuration, I would say most of the water went directly across, and we were able to minimize the actual obstruction just based on the features of the ceiling fan. It's a difficult thing to be able to do. The most conservative approach is certainly go straight down, straight across, box it out, and if the NFPA, if the standard says you have to be a certain distance away, well then that's what you are. This test just kind of demonstrates the spray patterns and operations and provides a little bit more of an interesting view. I'm going to go dry.